下面我们抓紧时间进入下一个环节，请2位评议嘉宾进行评议。第一位是东京大学社会情报研究所的吉见俊宅教授，请。
Thank you very much for invitation and very stimulating two presentations. As I am so much impressed by especially the Professor MAMDANI's presentation about university, the colonization of university and knowledge production. So please let me mainly comment on your presentation. So you talked about the challenge and the difficulties of decolonization of the universities in African countries. And so in relation with the discussion, let me explain a little bit about the Japanese case. As I understand, in more concretely, you discuss about 3 different splits or discrepancy or correlation of this decolonization. The first is between University of Post-Empire and University of Post-Colony. Because all the universities after the 19th century are strongly related with nationalism. So the German model, the Berlin University model, expanded all around the world. And at the same time, the other university is related with universality that is connected with human concept of human. But that concept of human or the nationalism is very different in each case, especially in case of the University of Empire or Post-Empire and the University of Post-Colony. In case of Japan, because Japan was empire in East Asia until 1945. And the establishment of the Japanese university after the mid of 19th century is strongly influenced by the Western university. But it is very different from the Western European universities. For example, in Japan, the national university or imperial university steal or pick up some of the fragment of the production or produce knowledge of Western university. I will explain a little bit. Because in case of the engineering, the Japanese engineering or the Japanese technology and engineering came from Scotland, especially Glasgow and Edinburgh. And in case of the medical science, a Japanese university or Tokyo University and Kyoto University, introduced the model of the German model. And in case of the agricultural science, that they introduced American university knowledge. In case of law science and political science, they introduced the French and literature from England, so Scotland and Germany and America and France and England. So we pick up any fragment and combine under the title of the empire after the end of the 19th century. So empire was the title of the very much fragmented knowledges in the development of Japanese university system. So this is another kind of university model of imperial the empire, another empire in Asia. So what happened after 1945? Because the Japanese empire collapsed, and after that, the university expanded. Because in 1945, there were only 48 universities in Japan. But nowadays, 800. We have 800 universities in Japan. So more than 20 times expanded because of the economic growth and the market mechanism and the globalization and that kind of the economic reason. So, and secondly, it's a very much important and amazing discussion of you because you discuss about the discrepancy or correlation between departments based on discipline and interdisciplinary streams, which is related with the discrepancy or the correlation between the excellence and relevance. It's very persuasive and very stimulating for me. I think in case of Japan, the introduction of the interdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary stream or interdisciplinary education was occurred in 3 different stages. First, introduction of interdisciplinarity was occurred after the war, from top to down. It was an introduction by US, because US concept of the general education or liberal arts were introduced in occupied Japan from American universities. So many universities set up the liberal arts college and the liberal arts education system and the general education system. And this was the first interdisciplinary education system in Japan after the war. And second stage of interdisciplinarity in Japanese university was late 1960s and the early 1970s by student revolt. There are, I think, very, very strong contrast between your discussion and the case in Japan. What happened in late 1960s was, I think, in Africa, people tried to make interdisciplinary stream and education challenge through university system or in university curricula and university organization. But in case of Japan, the student revolt or student challenge to set up the interdisciplinary education and the interdisciplinary learning, they fight against the university. So university was enemy of this interdisciplinary learning in late 1960s. They fight against the university very fast. So after the collapse, after the defeat of the student revolt, most of the important leaders and activists and intellectuals gone out of university. They moved out of the university, and they became, or some of them continued to teach, the grassroots education, the study group outside of university. And some of the leaders and activists became the cram school teachers. So the intellectuals or critical intellectuals, many of the critical intellectuals activists did not remain in the university after the early 1970s. So the relationship with the university and the critical activists. So in that sense, that kind of the grassroots and the bottom-up the challenge to set up the interdisciplinary possibility, or interdisciplinary, the learning and teaching project was not so much successful. And thirdly, after the 1990s, it is a little bit difficult, but after the late 1990s, because the Japanese university system is now decreasing or degrading, or there are many problems. So both from the ministry and the university students and critical intellectuals, many of the people try to think of another possibility, including the cultural studies and feminism and media studies and globalization studies, and that kind of thing is happened. It is very similar with other countries at the late 1990s. So, important thing is still now, I completely agree with you that there is a kind of the correlation or opposition between the excellence and relevance. In Japan, nowadays, the many universities, a little bit before, but many universities try to get the big funding under the title of the Center for Excellence. So excellence is a title to get a big budget from the government in Japan. So, and many faculties work very hard to get a big budget. But excellence, in that sense, is basically it's a very strong slogan for the status quo. Yeah, I agree with that. And thirdly, I'll say you talked about the split between the scholars and public intellectuals. And I think this kind of correction and opposition is related with university as institution and publishing system or media system or journals and magazine. In Japan, from late 19th centuries, Japan is a society of translation. We translate many European languages to Japanese or how say, the Chinese character languages. So we translated from alphabet to Chinese character. We translate so many knowledges. And based on that, that history, the many, how to say, private school was emerged, and also many publishing company emerged. And the publishing company and publishing market and the readers, the number of the readers is relatively large throughout Japanese modern history. So there's a kind of the discrepancy or kind of the split between the scholars in the university and public intellectuals, especially connected with the publishing company, big publishing company. These two sectors exist in Japan. And there's a not so, how to say, collaborative relationship. Because if you want to be famous, and if you want to publish, and if you want to work not so stressful, you can go to the publishing company and you can print out, you can publish your books and journals. On the other hand, university, and so the many talented people go out from the university and do their own work in the field of publishing. But within the university, there's a more, so the university is so, in one sense, because of that, university became relatively conservative. I will stop very soon. So finally, I think in the current situation, because we are facing the new era of the media and the communication and globalization. So we can discuss. I have no time to explain more, but so okay, I will finish. So I'll finish. I will discuss. And sorry, the Wang Xiaomin's discussion. Later I will discuss and I will do the comment. If I have time about the Wang Xiaomin, Professor Wang Xiaomin's presentation. Thank you very much.
下一位回应的嘉宾是来自这个香港岭南大学的陈清桥教授。陈教授，请。
谢谢主席。I want to also take this opportunity to thank the organizers Johnson, Guangxing, and Siming very much for organizing this forum and providing such an invaluable platform for all of us to reflect on questions which are familiar and yet not very familiar. What I would try to do in my 10 minutes or so is to try to echo the two excellent papers. In fact, it's not really any comments on them because I think they are both strongly and clearly stated, but try to provide some echoes from two points of view, one or two lines of thoughts, one linking to obviously the topic of this forum, as opened up by Himar Farid in his opening statement, pointing to the possibility of a new Bandam. And also I recall making particular reference to various sorts of efforts in scholarship as well as political action, and also rethinking of nation, state, respectively, and the links between them. That's the first line of what I would make my attempt. The second line is a kind of a self-centered approach to try to bring a little bit of the Hong Kong dimension to this. Yes. Now, I think I will, both papers, I think, address the bigger issue of transformation. Transformation allow us to look ahead and sometimes further ahead, as evidence in Wang Xiaoming's work and also the work of the thinkers that he talked about. Also as evidence in Professor Mamdani's own trajectory as an intellectual, as a professor in Africa, and in his attempt to provide us of the traces of these development from an intellectual, institutional point of view, and I think that that groundworks the transformation in a very deep-rooted way, which I hope that some of our discussions from yesterday can be brought up here and further elaborated in the coming forums, coming sessions as well. When I think about revolution, Hong Kong, I mean, I'm bringing Hong Kong right away because time is limited. Hong Kong is today a city in China working under this new model of one country, two system for 17 years since 1997. It is a population of 7.5 million, not much. In the university, one of the oldest and first university and core issue, from which core issues are still coming up in the most recent student movements, political actions, what's going to happen to the professors and public intellectuals who are teaching there and who have been identified clearly, publicly, internationally as provocators of the movement, as well as many of his students, some of whom, of course, have taken over the leadership during the movement in the last 6 or 7 months. What I'm going to talk about is not the event itself, but the way it connects to both the role of the relationship between public intellectual, the scholar, whether you are established scholar or young scholar students, and their roles at the same time, their roles within and without the university. All right. In Hong Kong, it's very popular. It has been popular for a while, for many time, and this issue comes back every now and then, and that is the issue of academic freedom and academic autonomy. Academic autonomy referring here specifically to the autonomy of individual universities and institutions for conducting its own business. Now, it's a bit complicated, but I'll leave it towards the end. I want to mention that, of course, the first revolution in China, 1911 Xinhai Revolution, was led by Sun Yat-sen, who was, if you go to the website of Hong Kong U, University of Hong Kong, ordinance incorporated in the same year, 1911, established formally in 1912, University of Hong Kong. If you go to its website today, you will see Sun Yat-sen and the university, and there's a profile of Sun Yat-sen, all right? They feature him very highly, of course, today, not in the colonial era, clearly. After 1997, they set up in Hong Kong U, podiums like Sun Yat-sen Podium and Plaza, and we have a lot of student forum and debates over there. Not so before 1997. Not so, and in the years that I studied there, which is in the 70s and 80s, towards the latter part of the Great Cultural Revolution. All right. Now, if the university is an example, there in the university, within the university, among not so much among the faculty as among the students, actually there were divergent views as to as to how do they take the great cultural reference, and of course, how do they take China at the time. But institutionally and academically, in the form of discipline, China, and especially modern China, in all its disciplines, were never taught. My home discipline is literature. I study literature in Hong Kong U, Chinese as well as Western literature. There was only one reading group offered by one of the professors in the department in the area of modern Chinese. We really have to skip class in order to go to the local bookstores and find books that are printed from, in those days the books from mainland are relatively cheap. Not so anymore today, but still. So institutionally, academically, China come into the discipline and curriculum in a very, of course, not so, again, classical and traditional Chinese studies, right? And that, basically, you can replicate that in the secondary curriculum as well, until probably all the way up to 1980s and 90s when there were a little bit of transformation. I'll come to that later on. From 1911 revolution, 1949 revolution, the great cultural revolution of the 60s and the 70s were experienced by the people and by the public of Hong Kong, but in the established institutions, and university and educational institutions are just a part of it. You could talk about other cultural institutions like library, all the cultural facilities that are, state funded by state. I'm referring to the to this city, which before 1997 was ruled under British, as a British colony and ruled by a British governor in Hong Kong, right? Sent from London. And after 1997, with the transition or handover, if you want, life is supposed to go on, because that was something that is promised in the Sino-British Joint Declaration signed by the two nations states in 1984. And so that leads to a problem, even from the point of view of cultural, intellectual institution, and from the point of view of especially the mode of production in the area of culture and knowledge, I think some would describe it as the result of a process of end of colonialism without decolonization in all forms, right? And I would not, my talk today is not going to focus on the political side, because that is quite evident. The signing of the two declaration was between the nations, states, and the people would really have little choice. But even from an institutional point of view, in such institutions as education or university, you can see, I will give you one small example and then relate that back to the recent movement. Hong Kong University was incorporated in 1911. All right, so that was, in a sense, also not only the beginning of the higher education history in Hong Kong. Unlike in the African case, this was during the colonial days, and the second university in Hong Kong was set up in 1967, I think. The Chinese University of Hong Kong, and until today we have 8 public universities and a few more private universities. But the major universities are really publicly funded. All the 8 universities, including my university now, Lingnan, and the Hong Kong Institute of Education, all these 8 universities are governed by ordinances. So this is in the tradition of the British common law and so forth. And the ordinances still today stipulate the governance structure of university, and in the ordinance stipulates that the chancellor of the university is the chief executive. Formally, it was the governor of the British colony of Hong Kong, of the Crown Colony of Hong Kong, they call it. So that institution was not changed. It's like a changing of flag, you change the name from governor to the chief executive. And of course, you see lots of problem there because the chief executive, the current movement and so forth is about democratic reform and clearly pinpointing on the lack of legitimacy of this and former, and looking forward whether, So the ordinances, or the ordinance also stipulate how the university councils are composed, mainly of laymen from the business sector, accountants, bankers, whatever, who are also appointed by the chief executive, formerly governor of Hong Kong. So that's one layer that has not been changed. Now, there may not be problems, but I think problems come in today quite visibly, and there are already discussions among students and professors, academics, of review of such ordinance. The current special administrative government is very much resistant to that. What the government is not conservative about is, however, is the opposite. And I'll give you one other example and stop, is to review the secondary curriculum, which is a new curriculum set up just 3 years ago, in 2012, with the territory-wide educational reform, which reduced 1 year of our secondary school and extend 1 year for the university. Now, since 2012, all universities in Hong Kong are 4 years, whereas previously we were 3 years following the British system. They introduced what is called liberal studies as a subject in high school, in secondary school, for the 6th year in the last 3 years, and this becomes an examinable topic required for all high school graduates if they want to apply for universities locally. It was argued, and many people agree, that it was this subject which has contributed to the rebellious nature of the young students, the secondary students, that led and came out very actively and socially in the last 2 or 3 years. Not just last year, but a couple of years before. So the pro-government counselors and even educators are coming out and say that they want to review this curriculum. And the point being whether it should be made a requirement. And second, to reintroduce Chinese history or reconfigure the subject of Chinese history in the curriculum. Now, I just read a couple of days ago, they are thinking of reconfiguring the content of the Chinese history subject in high school by making it 50-50 between classical Chinese or pre-modern Chinese history and 50% so-called neo-modern and modern. And there are a lot of debates because, of course, one argument is Chinese history is, over 3,000 years. How can you have 50% for the, So this is, but of course, now, interestingly, the pro-establishment camp is all out to insist that this be the case. All right. So I think I have more to say about institutional issues, which allows the chief executive, for example, one last example, to make a phone call during the earlier period of the umbrella movement, and the next day all the university presidents or their representative has to be in the administration's office. Now, we don't know what they talk about, but the fact that they can do that is partially, of course, provided for by the structure and by the ordinances that we now. So it's not just a question of power structure, but it is also related to, I think, what Professor MAMDANI was saying, shaping the whole mode of institutionalizing knowledge production, especially within university and the school system. Thank you.
感谢4位嘉宾的合作。我觉得我们在这里讨论的其实不仅仅是体制的问题，而是我们通过对教育方式和这个学科设置的思考，来重新思考我们该如何面对第3世界的历史。 如何面对万隆精神的那个核心的部分？所以在这个意义上，2位这个报告嘉宾表面上看没有关系的这个论题，在深层是高度一致的。我想在这个开放讨论之前呢，还要给这个2位嘉宾，特别是这个。 马姆达尼先生一些时间，因为刚才呢，3位亚洲的学者呢，把这个非洲的这个教育的问题呢，亚洲化了。那么我觉得还要有一个程序，我们还要把它再一次非洲化，因为时间的限制。 其实，马姆达尼先生没有把最重要的一点说出来，但是在我们的会议材料里边，其实他写了很多这方面相关的讨论。就是在非洲，其实无论是教育里边的，他刚才讲了一些2元对立的这样的一些分歧，还是在重新组织政治社会的这个过程当中。 面对的问题，比我们想象的要更为复杂，因为如果我们用一个简单的对立的图式去看的话，那么种族问题就是，非洲人和作为殖民者的白种人之间的对立。但事实上，非洲的思想家们早就突破了这样一个层面的讨论，他们把那个更复杂的社会正义的问题，通过把人种和 社会地理空间结合在一起的方式，重新进行了定义。我觉得今天恐怕马姆达尼先生给我们做报告的时候，为了迁就我们的无知，他必须讲一些最基础的东西，但是他一定还有更重要的一些想法。比如说，我个人听了以后，我有一个很强烈的问题，就是我很想请教。 在非洲的这样的一些教育机构里发生的争论，是不是有可能配合比如说非洲现代历史上在人种问题和公平问题，在这个进行民族主义创建和这个创建现代国家的这样的一些问题当中，那个最复杂的 要素，它有没有可能以更为纠缠的方式，通过知识论辩的方式呈现出来？所以，我想利用职权，再给马姆达尼先生一些时间，请他能不能对2位嘉宾的回应先做一点回应。
As I understand your question, it relates principally to South Africa. Yeah? Can you hear me? Yeah? So as I understand your question, it relates principally to South Africa. In the apartheid period, South Africa had two separate university systems. Excuse me, the white universities and the black universities. Black here stands for three different, what they used to call population groups. African, this is the official language, colored and Indian. Okay, the origin of the word black is from the Black Consciousness movement and Steve Biko. Before the Black Consciousness movement, political organization reproduced the official divisions between population groups. So you had an African National Congress, you had a Colored People's Congress, you had an Indian National Congress, which was originally set up by Gandhi in Durban, and you had a Congress of Democrats for whites. Okay, the importance, one very important thing about Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness movement was that Biko undercut this official division, which was reproduced in the domain of resistance for decades and decades, by saying black is not a color, black is an experience. And black now became a word for all non-whites. Anyone who was not white, anybody who was disenfranchised by law, now became black. So from that, you have black universities and you have white universities. The difference between the two university systems was that white universities were run on the basis of autonomy of the university from the power structure and academic freedom for the intellectual inside the university. And white universities cherished this, preserved it, fought to reproduce it, and were proud of it as an achievement. Black universities were established as an extension of the apparatus of the apartheid state. They were run by vice chancellors who were appointed by the apartheid authority, which means that any struggle in the black university was automatically a struggle against the apartheid state. It's not so in the white university. For those in the black university, academic freedom was another name for privilege, white privilege, right? Because it was limited to a few. And the demand was that academic freedom to be meaningful should include all academics. So this opposition too between the white and the black university was a very strong opposition and continues today, because now the official reference is to historically white universities and historically black universities. Okay. Amongst the white universities, you had the Afrikaner and the English-speaking. Afrikaans-speaking universities, English-speaking universities. My own experience is, and I don't know, Sam and some others here may bring a different perspective to this, but my experience is that the Afrikaans-speaking universities have been more successful in changing themselves than the English-speaking universities. The English-speaking universities like University of Cape Town, University of Witwatersrand, University of Natal, these are still very exclusive. They've changed the complexion of their student body, but they haven't really managed to change the complexion of their faculty, and really they have not managed to change their curriculum. Right? That is the significance of this Rhodes Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town now. I can go on because professors are paid by the hour, but I stop.
征集现场的问题。
I have a question. Actually, it's a series of queries. It appears to me, from what I could understand through the interpretation, that perhaps the identification of the Chinese national movement with the rest of the third world may have been affected by the fact that China was not fully colonized. The Opium War had an outcome, and following that, of course, many coastal regions were under the domination of Western and Japanese power. But China was not fully colonized. To what extent did that affect Chinese thought and identification with the rest of the third world? Secondly, to what extent did the Chinese diaspora affect thinking in this regard? As I understand it, most of the Chinese diaspora was from the south, the so-called rice eaters, as opposed to the wheat eaters of the north. And the wheat eaters who went abroad, if I understand history, what little I know about Chinese history correctly, were often relatively more in a different status in society. They did not go as workers, often as indentured workers. They went to study, for example. The people who went together, the generation of Lu Xun, for example. The reason I ask this question is because the Korean national movement and identification was much stronger, because partly I suspect because Korea was colonized directly by the Japanese. And if you look at 1919, for example, the March 10th movement preceded the May 4th movement, of course, just by a few weeks. But the different significance it had in terms of the anti-imperialist sentiment, it seems to me, is important. Now, when Sun Yat-sen goes abroad and mobilizes, the fact that he is mobilizing, that he himself is from a southern background, makes it easier for him, particularly in Southeast Asia, where he does a lot of the mobilization. And this has an influence also on the thinking in Southeast Asia, but also in China itself, it seems to me. I may be wrong, but it also has implications for Southeast Asia. Many of the leftist movements in Southeast Asia were strongly influenced by Chinese. Chinese teachers, for example, played a very, very important role. But it also meant that many of the communist parties, for example, were led by ethnic Chinese. And it affected the ability to mobilize among indigenous populations. That's not a question I want to pose to you, but I think it has important implications. One of the people mentioned by Hilma yesterday was the Indonesian author Pramodia. And Pramodia is in his second volume, at least the second volume of his, which I published, called Anak Semua Bangsa, A Child of All Nations. One of the key characters is a Chinese woman who goes and learns from the Philippine Revolution before coming to Indonesia, and plays an important role in the informal education of the nationalist figure in Indonesia. So I'm trying to understand what happened in China, partly in terms of the history of the different types of relationship of China with the rest of the region and also with the West. If you can help me to better understand this, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Since the professor has a few more hours, Mamdani, I thought you should elaborate the point which you rather briefly touched on, the native and modernist, that this is a key, what the content of this and its trajectory, or genealogy, if you like.
Well, a quick question to both the speakers. First to Professor Wang Xiaoming. Your use of both the terms is a bit intriguing to me. One, third world, which is obviously transposed anachronistically to a period when, and you mentioned that, but I didn't quite get what was at stake in using the term third world in that context. The second, your reference to early modern Chinese thought, I thought would refer to, in the little that I have read up on the debates on early modern modernity in China and so on, perhaps go back a few centuries earlier, not to the 19th, not to the end 19th, early 20th century, but for example, in Wang Hui's thing on bureaucratic examinations, civil service examinations and things and so on, which it refers back to a few centuries earlier. So is there actually a difference in the early modern in the sense in which you use it from the other debate where the early modern actually refers to an entirely different period? Mahmood's, for one question for you, which is actually, there were three terms you sort of used one after the other, three pairs. So the excellence relevance pair at one level was a replay of what we have seen in many other contexts of preserving of privilege in the name of excellence and the question of relevance being posed as a counter to that. But then the excellence relevance question becomes suddenly transposed in the current contemporary moment into a question of the public's, the scholar and the public intellectual. Now that seemed to be a big jump, which I didn't quite get the connection as to why the same terms continue to be used for a pair of categories of terms which are absolutely different, which have actually practically no connection with the earlier lot. Or is there a connection which I'm missing?
Yes, thanks for the excellent panel. Mahmood, I wanted to ask you whether or not the emergence of a social movement among students at Cape Town, what implications do you see arising from that movement among students when compared to your period in the early 90s or late 90s, like sometime in the 90s? Was there a movement among students at the time? And therefore, I'm trying to understand the current road statue issue and to what are the goals of the student movement today with respect to the transformation of the university and the curricula. Secondly, at the University of the West Indies, I would say when I heard the Japanese presenter speak about the buffet of intellectual courses and programs that I wanted to know, is there any effort in African universities to look more broadly outside of the English and the British and to some extent the American? Because certainly for UWI, for the social sciences, there's been a shift, certainly for social science, from a basic British diet to an American diet. Whether those kinds of considerations are part of what would be agitating students or staff. And finally, given the globalized nature of knowledge and technology and access, how are these things factored into how a university is thought about?
我非常有一点兴奋啊，听到这个曼丹尼先生的报告的时候，可以吗？我再说一下，我听到这个，我很高兴听到这个曼丹尼先生的报告，为什么呢？我也跟他的，基本上跟他的看法一致啊，不仅仅是我吧。 参与这个活动的大部分的我们的同事都一样吧。我们比如说举一个光性例子来说，他以前告诉我的说，他推动的是运动的理论化，同时理论的运动化。我也同意了，我个人的经历的也，制度内面的是大学的教师。 制度外面的一个另外的角色，就是个批判性的期刊的编辑。这个，所以呢，比较同意这样的看法。这个是我的意见、感受了。刚刚听到的，但是我在这里就提一个问题，很重要的。刚刚的印度的学者也提到了，这个 excellence 跟 relevance 的问题，这个非常重要。举一个韩国的例子来说呢，刚刚提到，周末也提到过，韩国从1910年到1945年被日本帝国殖民化，那个时期一个大学只一个大学而已啊。刚刚有些人说，日本帝国大学呢，把从很多的欧洲的大学的经验。 拿来的几个好的东西变成一个日本的帝国大学啊，但是呢，那个时代的韩国的帝国大学这一个大学呢，一个都是日本的这个 model 吧。结果呢，比如说 excellence 跟 relevance 完全被分开的，不感受到那个时代日本殖民时代的现实吧，不可能的。 所以还有这样的制度还留下来的，所以呢，我提问了呢 ，excellence 跟 relevance 非常重要，但是我们需要重新思考 excellence 这个概念，或者是重新定义这个 excellence 的概念了。怎么呢？把这个 relevance 怎么放进去到 excellence 这个概念？我觉得这个非常重要。一个是怎么重新定义 excellence 概念，或者是怎么把这个怎么制度化，这个重要吧？比如说，目前东亚地区的大学的制度内部的脉络上 ，excellence 呢等于国际竞争力，国际竞争力啊。所以呢，怎么摆脱这样的情况呢？这个非常重要，所以。 我想要听到曼丹尼先生的经验，比如说教育的时候怎么培养学生，你写文章的时候，发表你的文章的时候，怎么处理呢这个问题？我听到你的自己的经验，经验吧，这个非常重要。
Thank you. I have two questions. So one for Professor MAMDANI and the other for Professor Wang Xiaomin. So I'll co-switch between two languages. The first one is actually inspired by Professor Chen's commentary. I thought there's a lot of implications in his sort of roundabout, very careful and polite rendition of the situation in Hong Kong. The question is very simple. The question is, can we really achieve decolonization without building a nation state? In the sense, I think what Professor Chen was sort of laying out is sort of working through with that contradiction. And I wonder if the African case can sort of offer some kind of enlightenment on that. To what extent is decolonization possible without the nation state? Or, reverse, must decolonization only be recognized in the form of the nation state? 另外一个要问王老师的问题是，问题也相对简单，就是您提到的那个这些早期的思想家里头，想象扶助第三世界中国革命跟世界革命的关系，以及扶助弱小民族的时候，我听到大概都是用民族这个词汇，而不是国家。也就是说，如果我们考虑另外一个问题，比如说革命的第二天，那么当时的思想家如何理解中国革命，协助弱小民族发生革命之后的第二天如何进行？所以这是相对比较实践的问题，而不是一个思想的问题。但是我不知道王老师在您的研究里面有没有这样的一些发现？谢谢。
本来还想给更多提问的时间，但是现在看呢，我们没有那么大的容量了，所以呢，我转移矛盾，把这个接下来我希望把它转嫁到下午的讨论去，大家还有很多机会。那现在就请两位嘉宾分别做一些回应。首先，请这个马达尼先生。
Well, that's a very rich harvest of questions. I'm not going to answer them, but I'm going to give my views. Okay, I'm not going to pretend that I have answers, but I have views, and I will I will share those. I enjoyed Jomo's questions, and I'm going to enjoy the response from my colleague here. The question of nativism and modernism. It seems to me that at the social level now, most anti-state movements are speaking the language of either ethnicity or religion. They're not speaking a secular language. They're not speaking the language of nationalism, socialism. These languages have hardly any resonance, right? And I think the first thing we have to do is to notice this, right? Because our response has been to demonize the language of ethnicity and the language of religion. And therein lies part of our problem. Okay. When it comes to the intelligentsia, there has been a strong nativist current. I would say starting with Cheikh Anta Diop. Okay, starting with Cheikh Anta Diop. If you look at the trajectory of Nabudere in Uganda, okay, Wadada Nabudere begins as a Marxist intellectual. He writes The Political Economy of Imperialism and several related works. And then he sets up a Marcus Garvey Institute in Mbale. Okay? And you can actually go back to the Marcus Garvey W.B. Du Bois split, right? Du Bois claimed that the future of African Americans lies in America, and you have to fight for citizenship. And Garvey, that you back to Africa movement, you know. I think there are shades of that debate inside Africa itself, and they resonate at a lot of levels, including the question of who is an African. What do we understand by Pan-Africanism, right? There are different notions and modes of thinking when it comes to this, right? That's just a very preliminary sort of. Aditya, the question of excellence and relevance on the one hand, and scholarly and public intellectual. So, you know, excellence became the rallying cry of those who wanted to maintain the colonial university or the apartheid university, right? Associated with it was also an assumption, sometimes articulated, other times not articulated, that knowledge is universal. Knowledge is universal. Any attempt to contextualize knowledge is a compromise, right? And excellence requires that you should be able to travel across borders. Thought should travel. Thought should travel. Now that's under question in this conference. That's under question by the very, by having a session on knowledge production itself. Decolonizing knowledge production is questioning this claim, right? But in this context, so when the black universities, see the black universities in South Africa, right? The intellectual produced in the black university was necessarily and immediately a public intellectual, because that person had to confront the apartheid state and had to confront on the terrain of apartheid in South Africa and had to look for an audience on that terrain. The intellectual in the white university, in fact, had every stake in obscuring that terrain and claiming a global reach, in a sense. So in a place like South Africa, you can almost say that intellectuals in black universities are public intellectuals, and intellectuals in white universities are claiming to be global scholars, in a sense. We know that that doesn't hold. It doesn't hold, but those are the claims that are, or that are being made either by self or by the other, in a sense. I think this whole debate, well, you gave a paper on knowledge production, maybe not placed in this, but you more or less talking about how what claims to be universal theory should be understood, should be historicized and understood in the context in which it is produced. And our response to it should not be parochial, but another way of understanding the world, but from this location and from this history, right? That's how I understood you to be talking. So Rupert, I think what has changed at UCT, one, from the time I was there, is first simply the numbers of the black students. The demography has changed, right? Secondly, that they are not first generation in that place. They have been there for now 15, 20 years, kind of, you know. So there is a confidence, and there is an incredible alienation that the curriculum is not, it's not just the color of the people who teach them. It's not just Africanization, but what they learn in the classroom has nothing to say about their experience. Nothing whatsoever. This total alienation, that they are constantly being fed a curriculum which makes them feel that they don't belong to this world. Okay, that's, and they've come without tutors. Really, if you read their statements, they're groping. They're trying to find their way, right? Their statements are contradictory, right? You can begin with Clifford Geertz's definition of culture and end up with Frantz Fanon, and this is sort of, but they're moving, and there are lots of teachers offering themselves. There are those who think that the future lies in the Center for African Studies at UCT being given teaching lines and a curriculum, which I think would be a disaster because it would displace the question of decolonizing the curriculum. Larger question. We don't need an African Studies Institute in Africa. Everything is African studies, right? I mean, so that's what I think. Anyway, is there an attempt to look outside the British and American diet? Well, this is the big question. Who is to educate the educator? Marx's question, right? Who is to educate the educator? I mean, there are attempts in different places to produce a curriculum. We began a PhD program at Makerere, right? 5-year PhD program. How did we start? We started by taking what we know. I brought something which I knew from Columbia, something I knew from Dar es Salaam, something I knew from here, there. Then we keep on revising it, changing it. Come here, learn something new. So it's an ongoing process, right? So there's no, first thing we drop is the idea that there is a fixed menu which will answer the problem. There's none. There's none. Our colleague from Korea, yeah, I agree with you. We have to redefine excellence. That's the battle now. That's the battle now. So this claim that relevance is context specific and excellence can be decontextualized, I don't think it holds, right? I don't think it holds. That's the way out. The way out is to rethink excellence itself. It has to be able to travel, but it can't be unanchored from experience and history. I have no more reflection than that, but that's just the beginning, starting point of some thinking. My friend, the translator, right? So I think it's a very interesting question you ask. Can we achieve decolonization without building the nation state? I mean, as I said, in the African experience, the African university was a product of nationalism. And the African university came directly, in collision with nationalism in power, right? And therein lies our dilemma, right? I am not willing to drop. I'm not willing to see the state as the enemy, because we went through the World Bank experience in the 1990s. Right? The World Bank came and sought to privatize the university, right? And destroyed our research capacity, turned it into a version of a secondary school, right? I wrote a book called Scholars in the Marketplace. That's what they made us, sort of. So it is again, I wish there was just an easy alternative. There isn't. We're between big devils and small devils. And sometimes you got to be with the small devil to fight the big devil. Because if you go alone, you're finished, right? Thank you.
姚希咪教授强烈要求给他1分钟，所以在王晓明教授回应之前呢，先请吉健先生说2句。
Thank you very much. Just 1 minute. I think the very important question which was raised by Professor Mandani is what is academic freedom, and what is academic autonomy, and what is academic excellence and relevance. Because according to his discussion, especially in the context of South America, the the discourse or concept of academic freedom often works as to keep the white privileges. So that kind of thing, I think, often happen in many countries because many faculties and many professors emphasize that academic freedom and academic autonomy in the university. But these kinds of the discourse and concept often works as or affect or acts as to keep the status quo or to keep the privilege of professors in the established academic system. So in order to problematize this kind of the concept of academic freedom or university freedom, we need to redefine or problematize the concept of university itself, because concept of the university is basically emerged from Western Christianity in 12th and 13th century, and afterward expanded all around the world. So the Western Christianity and colonialism and the concept of the university is basically or historically entangled with each other. And after that, nationalism. So we think in order to go beyond that kind of discourse of status quo, in order to transform the educational system, we need to redefine or problematize the concept of university itself. This is my opinion. I'm not so sure what the Mandani response, but anyway, thank you.
好，下面请王晓明教授回应。
这个都是很大的问题，我尽可能的简短的来回应。这个殖民啊，要讲殖民啊，当然一个是很重要的是这个经济，另外一个同样重要的，也许可能今天来看是更重要的，就是这个文化的问题。我说文化的问题，也就是你这个地方，你的本来的原来的那个语言文字。和你的历史记忆，你这些东西在这个现代世界还有多少能够保留下来？那在中国，我觉得在这一点上有它的特别的地方，它人很多，地方也大，而且它的历史很久。那个中文呢，也多少年来2、3千年来，至少是一直是延续下来。所以因此看中国的衡量中国的这个被殖民的程度，你要是完全从这个政治的角度来讲，当然可以说中国的整个国家没有被完全这个殖民，但是在经济上，特别是在文化上，它那个被殖民的状态。这个是我觉得今天看是最重要的，而且我个人的一个比较粗暴的看法，就是这个文化上的被殖民的状态，从100年前一直延续下来，其实是某种程度上讲是越来越严重。但是所幸的是，在那个时代，我说现代早期。这个文化上的殖民的程度还不深，因此那个时候的思想家，他可以有各种各样的不同的想法。这是我的第一个问题，对周末第一个问题的一个回应。那么第二个问题就是对于就是说中国人对于现代，如果我们还是用 modern 这个词的话，对现代有没有自己的理解？我觉得这个至少在现代早期， 那个西方式的现代那套东西还没有成为中国人对现代的理解的主要的东西。中国人当时对现代的理解其实就是，简单说就是我们原来的那个日子过不下去了，我们必须要来考虑我们将来的日子怎么过。对有一些国家的人来说，在中国也有这样的人，认为这个问题是不存在的，因为我们只有将来要过日子，国家的道路只有走西方化的道路这一条路。这么想的话，这个问题就不存在。但是在当时的中国，是有不同的想法，包括那个时候，我觉得最有意思的一个想法就是那些强烈主张中国应该向西方学习的人，他们同时是很清楚的知道，这不是一条好的，不是我们的终点，这只是我们暂时要走的一条路。这个路的走的终点不是西方化，不是资本主义化，不是现代化，而是要结束这个现代，要走到另外的他们认为好的方向上去。可惜的是，我觉得比较糟糕的是，这个100年下来，这样的对现代的理解，就是始终要问一个问题：我们应该往哪里去？这样的一种对这个问题的这个讨论，在今天好像是变得越来越弱了。对今天的很多的中国人来说，不存在这个问题，我们就是要现代化，而且甚至觉得我们应该在现代化、在西方化这个方面，我们要做得最好，比美国人还要像美国人。这是我的第二个问题。第三个就是刚才这个志明问的这个问题，就是国家嘛。因为孙中山他们当时说，包括章太炎他们说，这个中国强大以后要去支援其他的被压迫的民族，他们当时确实是想的是要运用这个新的国家，确实他们是这么想。但是因为这个49年，你要49年以后，中国共产党的这个建立中华人民共和国以后，我们可以说有非常多的这个所谓的援助，越南是更明显的，还派了军队到这个朝鲜去。但是因为是用国家的这个方式来做的，而这个国家它是一定是处在当时的那个特定的那个国际政治的这个结构里面。所以应该说那个时候中国的老百姓，为了这些国际援助，中国老百姓付出了非常大的代价，牺牲是很大很大的。但是因为是用国际的这个方式，国家的方式来展开，一方面它动员力很大，力量很大，但是这个援助当中，如果一旦被放进了那个国家政治、地缘政治的考虑，这个问题就变得很复杂。所以这是我觉得现在是一个非常大的问题。但是我要说的就是，在整个现代早期，一直到我觉得最后一次大概是到1970年代，这个在国家的方式以外展开的这种中国人参与其他地方的这个斗争的事情，也还是零零星星的在发展，在延续的。我个人印象最后一次就是1960年代晚期，从云南有相当多的，据说数量是到底多少钱不知道，有的说是要有差不多有将近1万中国的年轻人偷渡国境，跑到缅甸去参加缅甸共产党领导的武装斗争，甚至这个有1000多人还专门被编成一支单独的作战部队， 而这些人过去的时候，有的时候连护照，他们很多人护照都没有的，中国的护照没有的。这个是我印象当中是最后一次。